Back, boxing fans, the great show with Sean on Boxing, lunchtime boxing talk. So I just saw someone continuously still try to push this anti-Golovkin, pro Errol Spence narrative, but yet you can see what everybody is saying right now, what AI said based on the facts, based on information, based on what boxing scene just came out about future Hall of Famers compared to guys that are on the bubble, right? Somebody talked about how Golovkin was manufactured, but every top fighter in boxing has been manufactured, including Errol Spence, who was obviously also manufactured. Errol Spence was a welterweight contender that nobody was talking about, nobody was in a hurry to fight, kind of similar to Golovkin. The only difference is Golovkin was a silver medalist in the Olympics, while Errol Spence never actually won a medal in the Olympics. So had very little buzz behind him coming into the pros. Golovkin signed with a German promoter, and that was kind of a terrible move on his part. Then he was kind of shelved as a second-tier middleweight behind Felix Sturm, who was also promoted by that promoter, and had a hard time getting big fights. Even though he wanted big fights, he couldn't get them because his promoter was not pushing for those big fights for him, but rather pushing their other star fighter in obviously Felix Sturm. Up until Floyd Mayweather used Errol Spence to basically duck a fight with Keith Thurman, saying that Thurman needed to beat Spence before Floyd would give him a fight, Spence was nothing. Only after Floyd jumped on the bandwagon and the PBC started pushing him and trying to create a pay-per-view star did he become relevant. And that shows you, when the PBC and Floyd tried to create and build him into a pay-per-view star. That is exactly what Golovkin and his team were also doing with him. There's no difference. You can throw around these titles like manufactured and created, but that literally has to do with every top fighter in boxing today, including the Tank Davises, the Keyshawn Davises, everybody. Because ultimately, promoters are trying to go the best route possible to blow somebody's name up, give them the accolades that fans will actually pay attention to them, and try to put them in a position where now they're marketable so the promoter can make lots of money off of them. It's all about how you promote a fighter, how you build a fighter, how you create a fighter so you can make as much money possible off of that fighter. So what's the difference between Golovkin and Spence? There is no difference. They both were trying to be created into pay-per-view stars, one by Showtime, one by HBO. Welcome back to part 2. So this clown came out and said, so if Golovkin was ducked at middleweight, why didn't he seek challenges outside the division? Why did he wait for smaller fighters to come up to make his name off of them? The irony is, this is a guy who gets pissed off when Golovkin is compared to B-Hop and Hagler. Yet you could say the exact same thing about both of them. Why did Hagler and B-Hop spend the majority of their career in the middleweight division? Hagler spent his whole career in the middleweight division. Unlike Golovkin, he never had any fights outside of the division. Golovkin at least went up once to fight Canelo at 168. We know B-Hop went up, but by that time, he was basically an old man and just fighting mediocre opponents and getting draws and losses the majority of those fights. So that was definitely not the point of his career that made him. What made him was fighting smaller fighters coming up. Lightweight Roberto Duran, welterweight Tommy Hearns, welterweight Sugar Ray Leonard, who beat him, a welterweight. Or Hagler, that's Hagler. Or B-Hop, waiting for Tito Trinidad, waiting for Oscar De La Hoya, waiting for Winky Wright, literally waiting for smaller fighters to come up to build his name. So there's no difference what Golovkin and his team did than what those other fighters did. And similarly, all of them were trying to become the dominant king of the division. Golovkin, yes, had 3 of the 4 belts at the middleweight division. I know this guy likes to say Spence was a 3-belt unified. Golovkin was also a 3-belt unified champion. It's not his fault that Canelo Alvarez literally ducked him and dropped the WBC title, kind of like Riddick Bowe did to avoid Lennox Lewis. You notice nobody hates on Lennox Lewis for unifying titles, even though the one title he got was a title that Riddick Bowe ducked and threw in the garbage. Very similar to Canelo Alvarez. Because either these people are too stupid, too ignorant, and don't know enough about the sport of boxing, or they just are pushing a fucking racial narrative. And we know that's what it is. Most of it has to do with stupidity and ignorance, and a lot of it has to do with racial fucking bias, right? Golovkin could have fought Billy Joe Saunders to become undisputed, which is exactly what Hopkins ended up becoming, and of course what Hagler was as well. He ended up not fighting him because he had a huge mega fight with Canelo Alvarez. So you could say, oh, why did he take that fight instead of undisputed? Well, why did Hagler take a fight with Leonard as opposed to a fight with Michael Nunn or somebody else like an Iran Barkley? Why did B-Hop end up not trying to redeem his 2 losses to Jermaine Taylor? Why didn't Hagler go up to light heavyweight and try to fight Michael Spinks and try to see if he was better than the Spinks Jinx, right? So this kind of hate, that's all it is. A way to discredit somebody you spent your whole career on YouTube basically hating. And everybody who's watched your channel knows exactly what you're about and what you've said over the years about Golovkin. It's ironic you don't say the same thing about Wilder, who's done far less.